imagination simply contained in the mind? Or does it tap into an unseen world with messages waiting to be told? There is a place where legends cross over into our world, where strange visions and whispers beckon, and superstition takes hold. Step into the Black Cat's shadow.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the Black Cat Shadow. This is your host Andy, podcasting from Kansas City, Missouri. This episode is going to be a Mythos Macabre episode where I look at the inspiration and mythology behind a classic horror movie. The movie that I'm going to be talking about in this episode is The Burning from 1981. We're going to be looking at the legend of Cropsey and see how it shows up in urban legends and folklore, and also how it shows up in true crime. And joining me in this episode is my new co-host. His name is Dakota.
Hey, what's going on?
Not much. Glad you could join me. Just so that everybody can kind of get an idea of who you are or whatever, just let everybody know like what's your favorite, or like one of your favorite horror movies is, or what type of horror movie you like the best, and maybe why.
Alright, well, obviously I'm Dakota, as Andy said. I'm actually more into like the psychological thriller type horror movies, like The Shining. That's by far my ultimate favorite scary movie, just because it gets you more on a psychological level where you start to fear the unknown.
Yeah, that movie is definitely affects you psychologically. It's one of those movies that stays with you, and it's definitely one of those movies that has an interesting story to it. One that you could like spend lots of time exploring, and yeah, so that's a great one.
Yeah, not even to mention the character dynamic between having a loving family that's kind of already, you can already see kind of signs of drifting apart, and then seeing this psychotic break in the husband. I mean, to me, horror is more about personal feelings, like your personal feelings towards the film, or like reading or anything. It's like, I'm an author. I mean, I write my own psychological thrillers, and I get into that. And I go into the more personal side of it, like taking a situation that somebody would think is just normal, like infidelity, and making it horrific, like a very dark side of it.
Okay, yeah. That's an interesting way to look at it, and to take things that are, take things like that are maybe more commonplace, but adding the horror element to them. So kind of going along with what I've done in some of the last episodes, I've kind of talked about what I've watched here recently. It's something that a lot of people have been talking about, and so I went and checked it out, and ended up like binge watching it, and that is the TV show Stranger Things on Netflix. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was there was great acting in it. The chemistry between the characters was awesome, and had a really interesting story. And of course, it paid a lot of respect to the 80s. There's a lot of nods to 80s movies in that, and also the music was really good. It's by the group called Survive, and they also did the music for a movie that I really like called The Guest, that I talked about a couple episodes ago. So if you like kind of techno 80s kind of revival type music, I would say check out the music on that. Especially the intro song is really good, and I'm definitely looking forward to season 2. Dakota, have you had a chance to check that one out yet?
Yeah, I actually just started watching it recently with my in-laws. I mean, they're the ones who kind of turned me on to the idea, and I watched like a portion of an episode, and I was just like, it's trippy to me. I mean,
oh yeah,
you've taken an 80s horror icon, like the idea of the 80s horror, and modernized it. Which, I mean, that's what people want. They want something that's modernized. But to me, I don't like remakes.
Okay.
And I don't like reimaginings, just because I like classics. But this is, to me, it's more of it is a reimagining, but it's a revision. But they're going back and they're taking all these different horror elements and kind of putting it into one about the disappearance like how this child disappeared and then they're reappearing in weird ways, and they haven't had much interaction with other humans. So it's kind of trippy. It kind of gets to you a little bit.
Oh yeah, definitely. I love the whole story behind it. Just the idea that's kind of about like parallel dimensions and different ways, the kind of secret experiments that the government was doing, and just the problems that creates. It's definitely an interesting story. So I like to talk about what's been updated on the streaming services that people may use, like Amazon and Netflix. And I was kind of looking through, and on Amazon Prime, they've added several movies in the last couple weeks. They added Amnesiac from 2015, Oculus from 2013, The Vatican Tapes from 2015, The Tales from the Dark Side movie from 1990, Afflicted from 2014, Cloverfield from 2008, The Others from 2001, Species from 1995, and Shadow Puppets from 2007. And then Netflix, they added a few as well for the last couple weeks. They added Sleepy Hollow from 1999. That's the movie with Johnny Depp in it. Final Destination 3 from 2006. And then they also added the Season 2 of the Most Haunted TV show from 2003. So that's about it for the streaming updates. I don't know, what do you think about that, Dakota? Any of those movies seen or stick out to you?
Pretty much seen a majority of them, specifically Oculus. I saw that one here recently. I wasn't a big fan of it, but yeah. They were in the right place. But like with Final Destination, those movies, that entire movie series, that's the kind of horror I like. The horror of the unknown, especially because you have an omnipotent character like Death. Uh-huh. Very, very present in the movie. You just don't know it. You just don't know that's who it is. You think it's some freak accident. But for the people who actually went in and did a little bit of research on it, the writers kind of threw in there that Death is a very omnipotent character.
Oh, yeah.
He's unseen. He knows everything. He knows how to get to you.
Yeah, definitely. I like how they're kind of built like almost like a slasher movie in a way, with like the different kills and people getting killed off one by one. So like they kind of made Death like a slasher killer almost.
Well, and that combines the two forms of like film that we like. You like the slashers, I like the very unknown. So it kind of gives you the best of both worlds. Some people would say it's cheesy. Actually, something very similar. Was it Maximum Overdrive?
Oh yeah, from
the 80s. That too. That's it's cheesy horror. That's kind of, I like cheesy horror films too. Like you wouldn't expect a truck to just come alive, right?
Yeah. Definitely, yeah. Those are some of my favorites. Are like B movies, and some of the crazier ones are like some that I get a lot of enjoyment out of. And when I sit down and watch a movie, I'm mainly going in for entertainment, and if it makes me think a little bit, that's cool too. But I definitely like the popcorn movies and just ones you can sit down and have a good time with.
You mentioned Sleepy Hollow. That was actually one of the very first movies that I actually sat and watched in depth, just because I like Johnny Depp. He's a very versatile actor, and I would like to see him in more horror films. I mean, he was actually in one of the Nightmare on Elm Street. He made a cameo.
Yeah, he was in the very first Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah, he made a cameo. It was on the TV when he was saying, "This is your brain, and this is your brain on drugs."
Yeah, and actually, so in the first one, he was actually one of the main characters. He was Glenn, which was the main character, Nancy. It was her boyfriend. He played that character, and he might have done a cameo in one of the later ones. I'm not sure.
I remember specifically that he did a cameo, because I'm trying to remember. It's been a while since I've seen all the movies. I mean, I've seen the remake, the one where they just butchered. They pretty much butchered the character Freddy Krueger, in my opinion. I mean, they made a horror icon. They tried to make it scarier,
right?
And they kind of failed at it.
Everybody hates that one, and it's been a while since I've seen it. I'll have to watch it again. I actually own it, but I haven't actually watched it for a long time.
Yeah, I'm not allowed to own horror movies.
Oh yeah,
that's That's a fiance thing. She really does not like horror movies, as we talked about.
And another cool thing about the technology and the way it's advanced and the way it's advanced how you watch movies, like you don't necessarily have to have the physical media. You know, you can just watch stuff online now. And so yeah, for people that for whatever reason, if they're not able to actually buy the movie, like the physical copy, they still have ways that they can watch things online. But yeah, so that's awesome. Anything else that you've seen recently that you want to mention or say that you liked?
I really don't know. I mean, every movie you've said on there, I've seen, like Cloverfield. I actually sat down and watched the entire Cloverfield series, the new one, 10 Cloverfield Lane.
Oh yeah.
And the original Cloverfield. Because I mean, I like the found footage films like Blair Witch Project.
Oh yeah.
Blair Witch Project has that amazing found footage in it, along with the other one by M. Night Shyamalan, The Signs. You know, had that one scene with the alien walking by. It's kind of it wasn't exactly found footage because it was given to the guy.
Yeah, but it was like that kind of caught footage of
same concept.
Yeah, and it kind of makes it a little bit more. I don't know if it's more believable, but
I kind of believe it's believable. I mean, they would think that they saw something strange, and I mean, they were living in the city. They were living in an inner city like community, so they're not used to seeing strange animals. So I mean, that's human nature to take out your camera. Like anymore, like 2016, we're taking out our camera phone and taking pictures at sunsets.
Yeah,
because we're not used to it. But I mean, I could believe it. I mean, like we're talking about the Cloverfield movies. I actually saw 10 Cloverfield Lane. To me, that's horror. That is horror because it's psychological. Because if you've seen the movie, you know how it works out, where it goes down the line of the character realizing that she's in this situation, she can't get out of it, to realizing that the guy was speaking the truth instead of just keeping her there.
Oh yeah. It's a great movie, lots of twists and turns. The characters interact really well in that movie. I really like that one.
Yeah, the ending was crazy. I mean, it left it open too, from my opinion. So it leaves it to where they want to make another one, but I haven't heard anything about making another Cloverfield movie.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just the way that the first two movies were made, they're kind of somewhat disconnected from each other, and they were kind of spread out, by several years. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens with that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see them like bring in a third movie and bring in some concepts from each one. But I mean, I think with John Goodman's character in that, he's already a creepy dude. I mean, if you've already seen some of his movies,
oh yeah,
I mean, he has this demeanor about him. It's very, very intense, regardless of what he plays. I mean, from playing in the Flintstones and the Big Lebowski, I mean, he's one character. He's very lovable, very laughable, and then you get a character who's kind of intense but still lovable and laughable to this deranged psycho.
Oh yeah, yeah. Just his range is amazing. Yeah.
I mean, I would love to see him in more horror movies. He was in one a while back. It was actually, I think they considered it like a dark comedy, but it's on Netflix. I'm not exactly sure what the name of it was.
Yeah, I know he was in Arachnophobia, like the spider movie, the killer spider movie, and that could be considered kind of like comedy horror, I guess. So now we're going to go ahead and start talking about The Burning. We're going to go ahead and get into the story and kind of explore that.
This summer, if you're planning to go camping, don't. If you're looking forward to midnight swims, don't.
Sneak on back to the campsite. Get some matches. Build us a hot fire. Don't be long.
And if you're thinking about being with someone where no one can see you, don't. Because this summer, a legend of terror isn't just a campfire story anymore.
They say he smashed his way through the bunk room door, just a mass of flames. Burned alive, cried out, "I will return! I will have my revenge!" He lives on whatever he can catch. Right now, he's out there, watching, waiting.
Who's there?
summer 5 years ago is about to happen again, and again, and again. The Burning.
Okay, so The Burning, it was released on May 8th, 1981. It was rated R. The director was a guy named Tony Malum, and he also directed a movie called Split Second. It's kind of like a creature feature. It's got Rutger Hauer in it, and it came out like in the mid-90s, I think. And I guess it's really hard to find now. I would love to be able to see it again. People may be familiar with the Weinstein brothers. They're big shot producers in Hollywood now. They produce some big budget movies, but this is the movie that actually got them their start. So Harvey Weinstein, he wrote the story of this, and he actually claims that he wrote it before the Friday the 13th, because a lot of times people will say that this was a Friday the 13th ripoff. And also Tony Malum, the director, he wrote the original story, and also a guy named Brad Gray. But they don't have any other writing credits to their names. And then Peter Lawrence actually wrote the screenplay along with Bob Weinstein. And Peter Lawrence, he's written episodes of the Thundercats and the Silverhawks cartoons, which I loved. When I was growing up, I watched those a lot. Dakota, do you know what those cartoons are? Did you ever get a chance to watch those?
Yeah, I love the Thundercats. My dad introduced me to those. My dad was a child of the 80s. He graduated high school in 85.
Okay.
And he taught me everything he knows about the 80s, from Transformers, that's my thing. But Thundercats, definitely Thundercats, and Snurf.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
The most annoying character in cartoon history, other than what's his name from He-Man, a little wizard-looking thing.
Oh yeah, it's like Orko or something like that, or
just very annoying too. But great shows from the 80s.
Yeah, I mean, I was a kid in the 80s and 90s, so yeah, I kind of caught the tail end of that, so it was good. So the cast in this movie, it's interesting. There's a lot of familiar faces in this one. Okay, so I'm just going to go down the cast of characters here. So the guy that played Todd, his name is Brian Matthews. He didn't really have any other horror movies to his credit. So Michelle, she was played by Leah Ayres, and she was in an episode of Freddy's Nightmares, that Freddy Krueger TV show that was kind of back in the 80s that they did. But I thought she was really recognizable. I was surprised that she wasn't in more stuff. I think she was in some TV shows in the 80s. Like Love Boat and Fantasy Island, so that's probably where I recognize her from. And then the guy that played Alfred, that's kind of like the guy that got picked on, his name is Brian Backer, and he hasn't really been in any other horror-related titles. The guy that played Glazer, he was Larry Joshua. He hasn't been in any other horror-related stuff. And then you get to Dave. He was played by Jason Alexander, and of course everybody knows him as George Costanza from Seinfeld. So it was kind of neat to see him in a kind of his first movie role, I think it was. And you can kind of see his personality coming through, even in this early movie. He brought a lot of comic relief to this movie. So Jason Alexander was also in another horror movie called Jacob's Ladder, which I've never seen that one, but it looks interesting. It looks like it might be kind of a psychological one. Are you familiar with that one at all, Dakota?
I kind of am. I think I've seen it, but that might have been probably almost 10 years ago. But what year did the movie come out?
Let's see here. It was probably like the early 90s.
Okay, so then if I've seen it, I don't remember, but it seems like something. If it's a psychological thriller, I mean, it would be something I'd be interested in.
Yeah, the main star is... Yeah, it was 1990 was when it came out. The main star was Tim Robbins. He was kind of more of a bigger star like in the 80s and 90s. He hasn't done a lot of stuff here lately, I don't think.
You were talking about Jason Alexander in this. to me, I think with his character, he's a comedian, through and through a comedian. But seeing him in a horror movie was kind of refreshing. I mean, I watched about halfway through it before my data gave out on my phone, so I wasn't able to finish watching it.
Oh, okay.
But to me, it felt like you said, his character came through. His actual character came through. And something interesting about him, I was looking up some information about him just because I was curious. A lot of his lines from Seinfeld, a lot of the stuff, like the way his character act, they weren't written in. He actually kind of like ad-libbed a lot of things he said. A lot of his demeanor and actions.
Oh wow, okay. That's cool.
So I mean that's really him. And I've seen different things with Jason Alexander in him. I mean, he was actually in a Nickelback music video.
Oh really?
Yeah, back in like 2013, 2014, he was in a Nickelback music video, and it was songs "Trying Not to Love You." Okay. It was very interesting to see him in it, and it was his character, the way he kind of acted.
Yeah, that's an interesting change for him, or something I would never have thought he would do, but I guess most people would never think he would be in a horror movie too. So then the character of Eddie was played by Ned Eisenberg, and I recognize him from more like mafia type movies and stuff like that, but he hasn't really done any other like horror type movies. And then you got Woodstock. He was played by Fisher Stevens, and I think he's been in a lot of stuff. I know he was in Hackers. He was like I guess the bad guy in Hackers. And I know he's been in a lot of other stuff, but he didn't really have a whole lot of like horror cred besides this movie. And then you have Sophie, which is played by Holly Hunter, which you don't really see that much in the movie, but it's kind of one of those things where she's actually in the movie, but I don't know if she's like, I don't think she really talks about it or doesn't like to talk about it or something, but, and of course Holly Hunter's been in like lots of great movies like Raising Arizona. Raising Arizona is like the only thing I know her from, because that's one of my favorite movies. But I thought the acting was really solid in this movie for a lot of like kind of no-name kid actors. So like on the movie poster and like the taglines for this movie, there's a couple that kind of caught my attention. And one is "Gather around the campfire to die," and another one is, and this one is actually quoted in the movie around the campfire, where the camp counselor says, "Don't look, he'll see you. Don't breathe, he'll hear you. Don't move, you're dead." So this movie was influenced by some earlier slashers like A Bay of Blood from 1971, Halloween from 1978, and Friday the 13th. I believe definitely influenced this movie.
It definitely did. I mean, it was kind of, to me, it seemed more like not like a knockoff, but I mean, Friday the 13th was a cult phenomenon. I mean, in the 80s, they had so many posters just coming out after the movie came out. It was almost like it kind of took over the horror element. It took over the horror genre. And it kind of paved the way for the creeping fear. I mean, you had people that were terrified of hockey masks, for pity's sake.
Yeah.
Because of that movie. And it was scary. It was scary. It was one of the very first slasher films that made you fear going to camp.
Yeah, and it was like the slasher movie that kind of ushered in the frenzy of slasher movies that came out in the 80s. Kind of like the first commercially successful slasher movie, in its time.
Yeah, I mean, Halloween was successful too, but it wasn't as successful as Friday the 13th, in my opinion.
Right.
I mean, Halloween really didn't take off until the sequel.
Right. Yeah.
Until the very first sequel, but I mean, who can forget the Scream Queen, Jamie Lee Curtis?
Oh,
I mean,
definitely.
But like I said, to me, The Burning is a just not directly descendant from Friday the 13th, but it's very close, just in the idea of the slasher who's coming back for revenge.
Yeah, that's definitely a popular theme in slasher movies. And also, actually, there was a nod to Mad Max, believe it or not. Mad Max, the first movie, came out in 1979, and there's a scene at the beginning of this movie where, it's in the hospital, Cropsey's in the hospital, and these two interns are like going in to look at him and take a peek at him, and the burned arm comes out and grabs the one nurse, and so that scene actually was inspired by Mad Max. I guess there was a scene in Mad Max that was similar to that. And so Tom Savini, he's a special effects like master. Pretty much, if you're a fan of like 80s horror, you're gonna know that name. He did a lot of special effects during that time for different movies, from Friday the 13th to this movie, to The Prowler, Friday the 13th Part 4. The list goes on and on. He did the first Friday the 13th movie, and then he turned down Friday the 13th Part 2 to do The Burning. And so, for better or worse. I really like Friday the 13th Part 2, so I think it was fine. It probably would have been just that much better with him doing the makeup. I don't know, Dakota, are you familiar with Tom Savini at all, with his work?
No, not exactly. I've actually only followed like the mainstream, like the newer mainstream makeup artists.
Okay.
Like V Neil, she's a creature character builder. I mean, she does makeup for creatures, but she also does like regular makeup for regular characters.
Let's see here. And I thought that the in this movie the score was pretty crazy. It sounded to me, it definitely sounded like it was John Carpenter inspired. He's the guy that directed Halloween and did the music for Halloween. And I thought the cinematography was interesting in this movie. I liked it. There was some different camera angles and that they had going on, and also the killer point of view in this movie reminds me of Halloween. It was definitely influenced big time by Halloween, and I think that this movie also influenced some newer things that has come out since. Any movie where the killer uses shears to kill, or any movie that has a similar backstory, like the whole revenge plot, like you said, Dakota. And also another thing that I saw on Quentin Tarantino's Grindhouse movie, he has like a bunch of like fake trailers that show during that movie. There's one in particular called Don't, and that one was inspired by this movie because I guess the trailer for this movie said don't a lot, like don't go in the woods, don't go to camp or whatever. And so that trailer that Quentin Tarantino did in Grindhouse is kind of I don't know what you call like a parody of this movie. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah, since we're on that topic of Quentin Tarantino, something I thought was pretty interesting. A lot of Quentin Tarantino's characters, including himself, that are in his movies, they all kind of interrelate. You've noticed that, right?
Oh no, you mean like just the characters, like in all of his different movies? You said.
Oh, yeah, a lot of the minor characters, like from Dusk Till Dawn. The sheriff that walks into the gas station.
Oh yeah.
He's actually related to a character from Reservoir Dogs.
Oh, okay. I never knew that.
He's related to a character from Reservoir Dogs, and let's see, was it Pulp Fiction, I believe? But what I'd like to see in any kind of horror movie that comes out in the future, hopefully somebody's listening to this because that be like $1 million idea. Make a franchise out of it, but interrelate your characters. Please interrelate your characters because it makes for more depth. I find a lot of horror movies some horror movies do lack depth.
Yeah, a lot of horror movies do lack depth. I would say, because they try to rely more on like the jump scares and the blood and gore and more of the thrills and things like that. And they don't really a lot of times they don't focus on making a good story, unfortunately.
Well, all these modern horror movies, like Paranormal Activity.
Uh-huh.
I mean, they're focusing on these direct scares.
Right.
Like, oh look, the pan is hanging from the ceiling with all these other all the silverware and everything, and then it all just drops. It was predictable. A lot of horror movies now are predictable, and they don't add depth to depth to the monster, the creature, the ghost, and they don't add depth to their characters. I'd like to see a movie where they go into the kind of like the backstory and I know it'd make a long movie, like a 4-hour movie. I mean, Lord of the Rings. If Lord of the Rings could get away with adding depth to their characters within just a few minutes, I'm pretty sure they could do that with a horror movie.
Yeah, I think people, like filmmakers, like especially with like in the horror genre, they feel like that people's attention spans are short or something, and they just want to throw the most like scary, quote unquote scary stuff at the screen they can, and just hope that something sticks. And I mean, it's all about making money too. And
well, yeah, like it's that, but we live in an era of attention deficit disorder. I mean, people have this fixation on their cell phones. For one, they don't go into a movie anticipating to be scared out of their pants. I mean, they anticipate the jump scares. It's getting to the point where they're not scary, just because they're anticipating this because they know the formula. Right. The horror genre formula, like music anymore, has been diluted down from its base. I mean, from the 50s. For the 50s horror films like The Blob, Creature from the Black Lagoon, all the way down to like the 80s horror genre of like Hellraiser. Hellraiser was like 85, 86, right?
Yeah, I think it was 87 actually.
Hellraiser followed the horror genre to a T, but it added in something that people don't expect. This character that can, like, well, I'm not going to say that either, because Freddy Krueger could do it too, where he could manipulate. He could easily manipulate not only his surrounding because of his power in the dream realm, obviously, but with Pinhead, he can manipulate human beings and turn them into mutant monsters. That to me is depth. You're giving a character power, like slasher films. I Know What You Did Last Summer. That was 1991, 92?
Oh, actually, I think that was like late 90s, I want to say.
Okay. So, like that with the character added depth. You have this character who these kids hit with a car, and he comes back for revenge. That's a slasher film. It automatically follows the genre of a slasher film. But something that kind of broke the mold back in the 80s was Child's Play. It broke the mold. It was kind of cheesy, but it did break the mold because the character wasn't coming back for revenge. He was already a psycho.
Yeah, he just wanted eternal life, basically.
Yeah, and it worked. It broke the mold, and it worked. And it not only scared people, they were afraid of dolls for, 5 years afterwards? But they kind of made it. They made it cheesy, so people weren't. They tried to fix the issue because they knew if they would have made the character like like an omnipotent character like Death from Final Destination, it would scare the bejesus out of people. They wouldn't want to play with dolls anymore. But they kind of added that comedy aspect into it. I think that was kind of genius for the writers. The writers kind of had a stroke of genius.
Yeah, I see what you mean. They added the humor, so kind of make it
less scary. Something that's not going to make it to where you have to have a priest sitting outside of the theater when they come out.
Yeah.
I mean, what was that? The Conjuring 2? Is that what all the ones like local up here in the Kansas area, like the Kansas, Missouri area, where they had all these priests and people standing outside the theater waiting for people to come out to talk?
Oh yeah, I didn't hear about that. That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, my brother-in-law and sister-in-law went and saw it, and they said it was scary, and they couldn't watch it again if they even tried. But
yeah.
Like you've seen it, and you told me that you thought it was okay, right?
I thought it was okay. Yeah, it wasn't like, I don't know. I guess I was expecting more from it, and I felt like it didn't quite deliver. But that's just my opinion. I know there's people that are kind of gushing over it and saying it's just as great as the first one, but I don't know. I wasn't a huge fan of the first one either, so I think maybe that's why I kind of went into it. I don't know, not super excited about it, I guess.
Yeah. So before we get off track too far, let's try to get back to this Cropsey thing, because I'm kind of more interested to hear what you're having to say about him, because the character himself, instead of following the ho hum formula of a character that dies to come back for revenge, he didn't die.
Right.
he never died. So he doesn't have that supernatural effect. That kind of sets it apart and makes it scary in its own way.
So basically, yeah. So the plot, for people that haven't seen it, but I mean, hopefully you have seen this already, because we're pretty much gonna, talk about the movie, and we probably won't spoil the very end, but we're gonna talk about it and reveal some plot points on it. But it's basically, like, the plot is a group of kids. They play a prank on a cruel caretaker at their summer camp, but the prank just goes wrong, and the caretaker, he catches on fire and he gets burned up very badly. But he's still alive. But after he's rehabilitated, and he's released from the hospital, he's just like filled up with, like, he wants vengeance, and so he goes back to, it's not the same summer camp, but it's like a different summer camp, I think, on the same lake or something. It seems like it's in the same general area as the old camp, but it's a different camp. But anyway, so he goes to this camp to kind of get his revenge on the camp, on kids, and actually one of the kids that did the prank to him from the beginning of the movie is now a adult camp counselor. Later on, as the movie picks up after he's released from the hospital, and kind of starts his killing spree. One of the camp counselors is the kid from the beginning that pulled the prank on him. So I thought that was interesting, even though I don't know if, like, Cropsey realized that he was one of the kids or not. They didn't really, like, go into that. But so they have a scene in this movie where they have, like, a campfire scene, and they have all the campers around the campfire, and the Todd, the main counselor, he's telling the story of Cropsey. So, and this is kind of what he says. He says, "This camp had a caretaker, and his name was Cropsey. Now, this Cropsey was a drunkard, a sadist, and he got real pleasure out of hurting and scaring. And he had these garden shears, the kind with long, thin blades. He carried them all the time, wherever he went. And he had this kind of demonic way of looking at you. One time, Cropsey really went after this kid from Brooklyn, followed him around night and day. He made this kid's life a living hell. But this time he chose the wrong guy, because the kid and some of his buddies had planned a little prank. Only problem was the gag went wrong. The next thing anybody knows, Cropsey's trapped alive and burning in his bunk. They try to get him out, but the fire's so fierce they can't reach him. All they can do is stand outside and listen to him cry out in agony. They say he smashed his way through the bunk room door in just a mass of flames. And as he burned alive, he cried out, 'I will return. I will have my revenge.' And they never found his body, but he survived. He lives on whatever he can catch. Eats them raw, alive. No longer human. Right now he's out there, watching and waiting. Don't look, he'll see you. Don't move, he'll hear you. And don't breathe, you're dead." And so that's kind of like his little campfire story. Of course, this guy in a mask jumps out and scares everybody when he tells that story. So you get kind of a fake jump scare there. But it's interesting, like in the movie, that the killing doesn't really start until after he tells the story. And then that's when Cropsey actually starts killing people. And then also in the movie, they kind of they have Cropsey living in an old coal mine, and he that's where he, like, takes his victims basically. And it's an interesting setting. He like at the end he kidnaps one of the campers and takes them there. So, and I thought that was an interesting setting for a killer to live in an old coal mine, because it's just kind of a spooky atmosphere. And then at the end, you see that the events of the movie become part of the legend too, because there's another counselor telling the story. The new story, with the movie, with the events from the movie added in. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I do have a quick question about this, actually. So what area of the United States does this actually take place in? And that kind of will set us up for like you said, a coal mine. I don't remember if they mentioned it or not.
I want to say maybe I know the legend is kind of local to New York, so maybe it's kind of around that area.
Well, yeah, I was reading something about like Staten Island, because there's this theory that you can go ghost hunting for the actual spirit of Cropsey, saying because there was an actual person named let's see, what was his name here? Jasper Francis Cropsey. He wasn't actually a caretaker for anything. He was actually a landscape artist at the Hudson River School.
Okay.
But he was actually from Staten Island. He lived in Staten Island and died there. So supposedly that's where they got the name for the Cropsey Maniac in that area.
Yeah.
But anymore, the legend's been diluted down, and it says here, I was doing some reading on it, that the actual legend came from actually a Boy Scout camp. There were two theories here: a Boy Scout camp or a Jewish sleepaway camp, and that was in the Hudson Valley. So that does make sense with the coal mine. So, because the Hudson Valley has been known for was actually a very industrial area in the 1800s. So you have coal mines, you have silver mines out that way, and I was actually kind of thinking that would have been like Virginia area, because coal mines are known in Virginia.
Right.
The Virginia area was known for having a lot of coal mines, a lot of coal mine collapses, and they were saying in this article I was reading that part of the legend came from, they said it was a miner that was trapped, and he got out of the mine, but he was driven mad by gases inside the mine, so he would hunt down whatever he could find. So that kind of fits the legend in the movie.
Oh yeah, definitely. I guess there obviously with any legend or folktale, there's kind of different versions that kind of get passed around, or like you said, it gets diluted over time, like that game Telephone. One person tells another, and by the time it gets to the end of the line, it's a totally different story. Lots of things added in. So generally, like the story goes, Cropsey is like always some kind of respected adult male who just happens to go insane after the accidental death of his family members, and becomes the Cropsey Maniac. So most versions, they kind of involve the accidental death of his children, and often an irresponsible camper starting a fire is the indirect cause of the deaths. And after disappearing for several weeks, the Cropsey Maniac returns to take his revenge on the camp, and campers begin showing up murdered, and Cropsey leaves behind messages like burning the word Cropsey onto the arm of his victims and starting small fires in the woods to make campers aware of his presence. And then, in this, camp counselors have to protect their campers by blocking the cabin doors and sleeping with hatchets. And, so the way the story goes, like one counselor is actually able to injure Cropsey with his hatchet, but Cropsey escapes, and the authorities, they try to capture him, but they can't find him. He gets away. And, according to the legend, Cropsey actually got shot multiple times and escapes the police still, and his body's never found. And, and so like when they tell the story, like there's no evidence of his death, and there's sometimes you hear strange voices and low, terrifying laughter in the woods. And I'm sure there's different versions, and I really like the version that you shared, Dakota.
It has two sides to it. It could be bad and it could be good. I mean, I'm sure the original legend had a lot of things in it that were kind of missing. They didn't make sense, but people throw in their own aspect to it, and they think what they think makes it scary, and the next person does it, and the next person does it. But that could be good and it could be bad. It just depends on the person's opinion. Like entertainment, like the saying, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So is entertainment. And horror movies were not meant to just scare people to scare them. It was to scare people to entertain them. And I did a little bit more searching and didn't think about this, but you were saying like the death of his family. Here's something I found: a Staten Island girl, around this in early 1900s. I guess she was murdered. Drove her father insane so he could find the murderer. But a lot of this centers around Staten Island. The legend centers around Staten Island and the camps around that area. I know there's a Boy Scout camp up there. Like, I was a Boy Scout, so I mean, I go into these things and actually look them up just because it was interesting.
Sure,
like the history of Boy Scouts, it was interesting. But Staten Island seems to be a hot spot for paranormal activity also. I mean, I've heard legends of people going to Staten Island and coming back a different person because of something they experienced there.
So yeah, there was a documentary that came out, and it used to be on Netflix. I don't think it is anymore, but it's called Cropsey, and it actually talks about this man named Andre Rand. He worked as a janitor at the Willowbrook State School. It was like an institution for mentally disabled children. So that was on Staten Island, and I guess, you know, on Staten Island, like the ghost story that was kind of passed around was like Cropsey lives in the abandoned Seaview Hospital. It's like an old hospital on Staten Island, and they would say that he kidnaps the neighborhood children and takes them to the, you know, abandoned hospital. But in the 70s, children actually did start going missing, and their main suspect was this man named Andre Rand. And so I guess there was a couple of abandoned schools on that island. There was the Willowbrook and the Seaview. I guess Willowbrook got closed down because of its mistreatment of its students or its patients. And actually, Geraldo Rivera actually was the one that kind of did an expose on it in 1972, and then, you know, kind of exposed what they were doing to the kids. And by 1987, the school was shut down for good. So, like I said, in the 70s, like, these kids started to actually go missing. So the first kid to go missing was 5-year-old Alice Pereira. I'm not sure how you say her last name, but she vanished in 1972 while she was playing with her brother. The second was 7-year-old Holly Ann Hughes, who, according to witnesses, was spotted with Andre Rand on the day of her disappearance in 1981. And then the third was 11-year-old Tia Heath Jackson. I don't even know how you say her name, but she disappeared shortly after Rand was released from prison in 1983. And then the fourth was Hank Gafforio, a 22-year-old man with a low IQ who was last seen with Rand at a diner in 1984. And like, none of these bodies have ever been found of these people that went missing. And then in 1987, a girl named Jennifer Schweiger, she has Down syndrome. She was a 12-year-old, and she went missing. You know, she told her parents that she was going for a walk, but never came back. And they had a massive search party, and the, you know, the neighbors, you know, they combed empty lots on Staten Island and the wooded parks, and you know, they were searching these abandoned properties, you know, these old hospitals on Staten Island. And at this time, Andre Rand's actually like a homeless person, and he was living in he was living like in a makeshift campsite near one of these old hospitals. And so while they were searching for Jennifer near this abandoned school, a firefighter actually found a small foot in the earth, like it remains, and it was actually they actually found Jennifer's body buried in a shallow grave, and then they found Andre Rand's camp was just a short distance from there. So Andre Rand was actually arrested and charged with that murder of Jennifer, of that latest missing person, and so, you know, the case was pretty much open and shut. Rand was at that time he got arrested. He was an ex-con already with record of crimes against children. In 1969, he was arrested in the South Bronx after attempting to rape a young girl. In 1983, while working for a Staten Island school bus company, he kidnapped 11 children, bought them lunch, and drove them to the New Jersey's Newark International Airport for no apparent reason. Yet there wasn't really a whole lot of evidence that linked Rand to the murder of Jennifer Schweiger. But in 1988, he was ultimately convicted of kidnapping in the first degree and sentenced to 25 years in prison. The jury was unable to reach a verdict on the murder charge, so that kind of fell by the wayside. But in 2004, just 4 years shy of becoming eligible for parole, Rand was put on trial for once more, this time for the 23-year-old case of Holly Ann Hughes. And prosecutors, they presented new evidence in the proceedings, and so the jury convicted Rand of kidnapping Holly Ann Hughes, and he was sentenced to another 25 years. But, you know, the cases of the other kids and the grown man that went missing, they all remain unsolved. You know, in each one, Rand, you know, he's a prime suspect, but with the body still missing, they didn't have evidence to convict. And so you could say that these kids fell victim to the actual Cropsey legend, you know, to an actual person that could be Cropsey.
I found something interesting about him, actually. He's actually in Staten Island. He's actually still imprisoned. imprisoned. I think it was Staten. I don't know. I'm seeing Staten Island prison, but I didn't think there was a prison in Staten Island. But he's actually eligible for parole in the year 2037, which is coming up pretty quick.
Yeah, it's kind of scary.
If he doesn't die between now and then, but I'm pretty sure I'm surprised he hadn't died in prison. I mean, the number of people in prison that would kill somebody for killing a child is insane.
Oh yeah, they kind of don't they keep those kind of people away from the general population? I think
they do. Now ever since 1995 they have. I know like Leavenworth, specifically Leavenworth Prison for the which is the federal prison. Mm-hmm. Anybody who's like, because if the FBI takes somebody down like a child molester and it becomes violent and they actually end up killing somebody, they actually end up being sent to Leavenworth because that is a big federal crime. But he was actually born on March 11th, 1944 as Frank Rushan.
Oh, so he changed his name.
He changed his name. I believe maybe when he changed his name, or it's the name he goes by. Maybe it was. I don't think there's any legal. I'm not seeing any legal documents saying that his name is actually Andre Rand. I found his birth certificate online because you can see his birth. Anybody who's convicted of a crime has a birth certificate online. I mean, you don't really see it, but you know that they have a birth certificate online, and it is in the name of Frank Rushan.
Yeah, it's just kind of freaky to think about, and especially if you have kids. Leavenworth, that's kind of like in our general area here. It's so to think about people that are there. That I don't know. Well, anyway, but
you don't mess with the people in Leavenworth. I mean, that is scary people. Those are the mass murderers, the federal detainees. Because it's the biggest prison and one of the biggest prisons in the United States. I was going to say biggest, but that's not true either. Okay. That's Texas. This is it's interesting to think about this guy being the way he is. I mean, he seems more mentally disturbed than anything else. It's a shame that there wasn't effective treatment for that. I mean, prevention of something like that. I know it's going to sound authoritarian, but prevention of people from that could do harm, or even helping people that we know that can do harm. It's going to sound like something from Minority Report.
Like pre-crime, yeah.
Yeah, pre-crime. I mean, knowing these people that exist out there that actually have this fixation, like serial killers, that's my passion. I'm passionate in understanding serial killers. I know it sounds like something that you would see off of like a documentary or a I almost got away with it kind of thing off of like Investigation Discovery, but having this fixation on serial killers and understanding them kind of makes you understand these slasher films too. Okay. You can understand where this person's coming from. I mean, if a bunch of kids hit me in a car or set me on fire or stabbed me and threw me in a lake, I mean, if that happened to me and I came back to life, I would want revenge.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, I came back to life. I mean, I came back to life mentally deranged, but
sure, yeah. Yeah, it's good stuff. I mean, it's a good movie. It's it presents an interesting legend and a legend that has some roots, in some true crime too. So it's very interesting to look at.
When I was running across some research here, we were talking about the dilution of these characters and these ideas in horror movies. Imagine if we didn't have horror movies and TV, and we didn't have the technology we have now. Let's just say that. And we were like, it was 1912 again. If a lot of these things that were happening, us in this area like Kansas, Missouri, we would have never known about this stuff until it hit the newspapers. And that would have been like months and months afterwards. So we would have never known if this guy, this Andre Rand, was still around. It's just amazing though that the advance in technology can also add to horror.
Sure, yeah.
But it also has a negative effect too because it dilutes it.
Kind of desensitizes people.
Yeah, and I mean, well, that's what I think television desensitizes people from what's really going on anyways. I mean, we have horror movies and we see things like Psycho. Let's go with that. People don't realize it. There are people out there really like that.
Yeah. I believe it.
Like, what year did Psycho come out? That was...
It was 1960.
Okay, so taking into consideration that these people in that time. I mean, I mentioned to you once that about how we would feel if we had no technology. We were back in the 60s, like, and we were seeing this. How would we feel? How would these generation of people feel if these horror icons, like the 50s, the Blob, if that really happened? I like to throw out there, like, the War of the Worlds. It initially came out on the radio.
Right.
And there was mass hysteria and panic. It was on Halloween. It was supposed to be a prank.
Yeah.
It was supposed to have been a radio prank, and it caused mass hysteria. There was murders, there was looting, there was rioting. Imagine if the desensitization, that's how you say it. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not. My grammaticals are way off. Let's just say that.
That's okay. Do close.
If this desensitization, or however you say it, actually never happened, we'd be in a state of panic right now because of all, like, these ghosts. People, there's a cult phenomenon following ghosts. We got people that have this sort of fixation, kind of like people like me with fixation on serial killers and studying them. They have fixations on ghosts, demons, serial killers, slashers.
Yeah,
that's a good thing. So it's a good thing, so we understand them.
Yeah,
but,
I mean, you look at all the movies coming out, and anymore, it's every movie, just about every, not every movie, but a lot of movies that are coming out, like a lot of the big budget horror movies are like ghost movies, or dealing with a ghost or a possession or something like that.
I mean, I like the movies like with possessions, like The Devil Inside. That one came out in 2013 or 2012 or earlier. I'm not even sure.
Yeah, it's something like that. Yeah.
Okay, so that kind of follows like the Exorcist back in the 80s, right, or 70s? Was that 70s?
Yeah, it was late 70s.
Okay, so that kind of follows that specific formula. Okay, you have this woman that was possessed. Well, she went crazy, and her son is trying to figure out what's going on with her because he can't get to her. So he becomes a priest to get to her. I think that's what happened. It might be mixing up my movies.
Are you talking about The Devil Inside?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember. It's been a while since I've seen that one. It seemed like there was like a girl and her mother was possessed or something, but that's really all I remember about it.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that was it. It was the girl, her mother was possessed, and I mean, that's the kind of movie I like. The one that gets you, but it's not full of jump scares. It's full of this oncoming dread. Like, you're walking into a room and you feel this dread. I mean, I went and saw it in theaters. I'm sitting in the theater. The first time where the daughter sees her mother possessed, she's walking into the room in this in a sanitarium. Mm-hmm. She walks up closer, and you feel this like sense of dread because you see this woman and she's perfectly still.
Oh yeah, I remember watching that in the theater, and I remember there was a lot of suspense to that movie, and that was a found footage movie too, if I believe.
That kind of, in a way, that broke the mold because not a lot of possession movies have a found footage feature to it. To me, it was clunky in a way, but it also added that effect, that actual horror effect. Like, this is happening first person, and I'm seeing this with my own eyes.
Yeah, it was an interesting movie.
Well, I mean, that's all I really have to add on to that. I mean,
all right.
Horror is what horror is. People are going to be scared of it if they're not. But like I've said, being this formula gets diluted, and people aren't going to be afraid of it. So I think something new. I think they need to come out with something new and maybe add some more depth to the characters. But there are some good horror movies out there, and I will commend those people for that.
Yeah, there's some interesting horror coming out now. I think people are starting to kind of be on that same page as you. Like, something needs to change. We need to have something new in horror, and have more depth to it. So I feel like I'm seeing more movies coming out like that. So it's good. I feel like there's still hope for horror yet. So I think that's going to wrap it up for us, guys. And you can catch us on social media. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at Black Hat Podcast. And also we're on Horror Amino. We usually post about just news about horror movies, anything else that looks interesting, and also I haven't really ever talked about this, but the music that I do on this podcast is music that I make myself and in my band. And if you guys want to check that out, The band is called Me and My Shadow. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at Omega Hi-Fi. So yeah, check that out if you like the music on this podcast. And also on the website, you can go to blackcatshadow.com and you can find like all of our episodes and links to us on iTunes and Stitcher. And also you can find a link to my eBay page where I'm sell movie memorabilia. And also, if you haven't yet left an iTunes review, go ahead. Like if you listen to us on iTunes, just leave a review on there. That helps us out. Helps us kind of get better, higher up in the listings, and more people can discover us that way. And I don't know, Dakota, do you have anything you want to plug?
Yeah, guys, I'm actually getting ready to start getting back into social media. I got out of it for a while due to some minor drama. Let's not go into that, but
yeah.
Just keep in contact with us. We'll try to get me up and running on social media. You guys can talk to us. I'm gonna try to get a little chat going with some people on here, and hopefully we can get some ideas from you guys. Because I mean, we're not gonna ever run out of ideas. Obviously, horror is such a wide genre. But if you guys throw out some ideas to us, I mean, hopefully I can do some research and look into some of your ideas. Also, be looking out. I'm actually going to try to get some excerpts from one of my books I'm running right now. It is a psychological thriller. Just forewarning you, it's not exactly horror, but if you're scared of the human mind, it's scared of what it can do, I will happily oblige you, and I'll bring you an excerpt, and hopefully I can get you guys on the same page as me and get some good ideas from you.
Oh yeah, that sounds great, man. I'm looking forward to that. Well, and also, if you guys have any questions or want to send us an email, you can reach us blackcatpodcast@gmail.com. So that will wrap up this episode, this Mythos Macabre. Hope you guys enjoyed it. And remember to look closer at the world around you, and you might just find it as stranger and more mysterious than you thought, especially in the Black Cat's shadow.